Hey everybody, it's Mountain Monday, so you know what to do. Breathe in and out. And breathe in and out. And yes, I can breathe better this week. I won't say I'm 100% yet, but I am up to about 75%, so that's way better than I was doing. But the thing about getting really sick is that it gives you a lot of time to think because you're not doing things. And boredom is a killer in a lot of ways. I've very rarely found myself bored, but oh boy, have I been bored lately. Not enough video games in the world to alleviate the boredom from being sick for this long. But it's also one of those sort of take stock of your life and where do I want to go and where do I been and all that stuff. And one of the things that I ended up going back to a lot is, this notion of associating with people that have the discussions, not necessarily the discussions I want to have, but have discussions in a way that I feel is productive. And notice I didn't say that I'm comfortable with. I said that I feel is productive. And I've been mulling this over a lot while ill. A great way to drive yourself crazy. But what I realized is at, the center of it all, people say, the internet isn't a good place to have a conversation. Say people who have their most meaningful conversations on the internet. And let's face it, in some ways, the internet is a good place to have a conversation because it's not a face-to-face rejection. If you tell somebody something personal, you don't have to see that feeling like they've been punched in the gut kicks in, sort of thing. But on the other hand, people take things surprisingly personally for something that's not happening face to face. And I've always found that kind of strange. And, I turn to, my own reactions. I've been watching myself very carefully, trying to figure out what gets me really like, okay, timeout, line cross sort of thing on the internet. And what I find it is I find I get annoyed to the point that, I can no longer keep my cool when I feel like somebody's not dealing with me. I won't even say fairly, straight, right? And not straight in that heteronormative sort of way. Just, when I feel like somebody is speaking what they truly believe, no matter what that is, it can be the most ridiculous, potentially abhorrent statement, out there. If it's what they really believe, I have a certain amount of respect for that because there's always a certain amount of risk for putting your ideas out there. And if someone truly believes something, then they can debate it and they can talk about it and they can do that without really being threatened because they really believe it. That is their convictions. Those are their views. When you get people who are opportunists or who have an agenda, it's a very different dynamic to a conversation because instead of just speaking for themselves, they're speaking to an audience. They're trying to maintain their status in a club. And that means that they're more interested in saying things that other people are going to, click the little heart button on Twitter or the little like button on Facebook. And that means that you're not going to get anywhere in the conversation. There's no comparison I can think of, even with a sports metaphor. Sorry, I just had to jiggle the mouse to make sure the screensaver didn't shut down. But there's nothing even comparative in anything else but politics that way. Because even in a sport, there's an object, like there's a point in a sport where the game ends. And in politics, the game never ends. It's this perpetual cycle of trying to score sound bites and make the other guy look bad. And I know that's a gendered term, but and that's the part where I go, no. I, at a very young age, realized I did not do well in those situations. It's why I first of all, pursued science until I discovered the hard way watching what happened to my stepfather. There's a huge amount of politics in science, and that was really earth-shattering for me to discover that this, this port in the political storm was actually just another political storm in and of itself. I can't believe the politics in science. And so myself going into the sciences, and then I saw what happened to my stepfather. And I'm like, this what is supposed to be a bastion of fairness isn't fair. And I think that really, it made me want to go into sort of the stories behind technology and the stories behind creations built with technology, like video games, like virtual reality. I became very interested in the stories and people surrounding those things, because I felt like people like my stepfather were really getting lost in the politics and in this false meritocracy that a lot of bad ideas get through. I mean, the anti-vaccination movement is a shining example of something that got all the way through a journal called The Lancet, and that, sparked off this hysteria because it ended up in a scientific journal. And it's true of the press as well. I'm fortunate or unfortunate, depending on the side of the coin you're on, to actually be at ground zero for stories in, everywhere from certain crimes to, some cybersecurity stuff, to music, to television, to film, to video games. I see it. And if I don't see it, I have, contacts and sources that tell me things. And I'm fortunate enough that people tell me things off the record, and I keep it off the record because these are important points of context that I use to vet things going down the line. There's no such thing as a useless piece of information. And I've realized how much those conversations differ, those really earnest, honest conversations by people who really want to make great tech or really want to make a great game. And there may be differences of opinion about how to do that, but there is no doubt that everybody's interest, everybody's primary goal in that instance is to video game or to make a better cell phone or to make a better computer or what have you. When you get into this culture war influence, the thing that pivots is it's not about making a better world, it's about being right. And why is this different? Well, don't you want to be right so you can make a better world? No, it's not quite the same thing. Because the world is nuanced and the world is not simple. And the world indicates different solutions to different problems. Sometimes if you just take, economics, for instance, sometimes the free market solution is absolutely the best one. Others, a more, what they call a Keynesian approach, makes more sense. And, it all comes down in layman's terms to how much money people have to play with and how much debt people are in compared to how much debt the government is in and how much revenue a government is in. And I mean, our government here in Canada made the bold choice to run on a platform that said, personal debt is high, government debt is low, interest rates are going to be low for the foreseeable future. That those are prime conditions for government spending. Because why? Not because you want to take on debt, because you want to take on the minimum amount of debt. And everyone knows who's ever even owned a credit card. That's smart economics. And, one of the things I've also had it's going to sound strange to say privilege, but this is the old school version of privilege. I've been fortunate to have risen significantly in terms of socioeconomic bracket in my lifetime. And not a lot of people my age have had this experience because of the way the economy has turned. But I went from, there were periods we were on welfare. I remember the lock the school wanted us to buy for the locker was too much money. And so my mother made me go out and buy a cheap lock. And it was so embarrassing because, there were all these locks that were exactly the same and then mine. And why? Because, and we're talking a $4 lock. Like that's how tight things were when I was a kid. And so, I went from that. And the other thing I remember is getting a gift package from some government service at Christmas because, we were on social assistance and they gave gift packages that year too. And, it was stuff we didn't have. It was stuff like, curling irons and things like that were luxuries that, and to think now, oh God, curling irons were a big deal. But there was always a certain amount of shame every time I even thought about using it because it was the poor person box, right? And I went from that to a situation where, right now I'm rearranging the room I do these recordings in to, make it look better with a new TV. I'd rather have that kind of stress, right? Like, yeah, it looks like a dump right now, but oh my God, take a pulse, see where my life is. That's a big, big change. And that's a big improvement, to go from social assistance to home ownership. That's big. But what that taught me is how the different economic classes spend money and the relationship that people without a lot of money and people of means have to money. And it's exceptionally different. Like the way rich people look at money and spend money and treat money and feel about money is night and day from the way a poor person sees money. And that has really affected my view of the world, to realize that class determination is probably the most important thing in terms of success. That relationship to money, right? Because if you have a healthy relationship to money and know how to make those calculated risks, then you'll do very well. If you have an unhealthy or fearful relationship to any money, you're going to do less well because you're going to make decisions out of fear and not spend your money wisely. Fear of debt being a part of that. Rich people have a much greater tolerance for debt than poor people do. Trust me. My family growing up was terrified of credit cards, and now, the loans you get for business are astronomical amounts of money in my eyes. And that made me think about access to information and the public, and, this idea of journalism as public education and all these, autodidact thinkers out there on the internet. And that really, I think every person who takes an idea, every person who absorbs an idea is going to weigh whether that's a good idea, the merit of that idea through that lens. Are you a rich person or a poor person? And by rich person, I don't necessarily mean you have a ton of cash flow now. How were you raised? What attitudes to money were you raised with? That, I believe, is the fundamental primary determinant of success, is a person's relationship with money. And other things, but money, obviously we're talking financial success here. It's really the same thing no matter what you apply it to. You want to be successful with people. It's all about your relationship to emotions, other people's and your own. Are you going to be afraid of them and try to avoid spending emotional currency, or are you going to make those smart investments? It's really the same formula under a different package. And I turn this to games and what's going on in games right now. And I see a lot of poor people A lot of people who are so afraid that everything is going to be taken away from them, that they take the wrong risks. It's not that they take no risks, because we all know that, poor people, to me, the whole thing growing up is that somehow all these people, they didn't have money for kids' college, and they didn't have money for, a decent place to live, or they wouldn't be living in that neighborhood. But they always had a big TV and satellite, and that was a sort of joke, and that's where you get the idea of, welfare cheats and all that stuff. But what it was, there's actually a reason for that choice that we may look down our noses on. It was that the TV made them happy now. And the idea of delayed gratification is a tough thing to get your head around when you don't have very much gratification to begin with. Like, think about it. If you feel like garbage every day of your life, and you can turn on a magic box that makes you feel better for even 2-3 hours a day, wouldn't you do it? Like, there is a reason for this. And it's not laziness, and it's not bad decisions. It is that fear of trying for more, fear of giving up some of that instant, temporary, fleeting happy, or coping is what it actually is, because at the end of the day, you're really not happy, for, an opportunity at real happiness, a permanent improvement in your situation. And that is a risk that is often too scary for most people to even consider attempting, because it's a risk they say are really risk averse. And if you look at the internet, the riskiest thing you can do is say something positive to someone, because somebody may make fun of you. And if you're sincere in it, that hurts when you reach out your hand to somebody and they smack it away. And a lot of us spend a lot of time on the internet because we're used to rejection in the real world. And I count myself in that. And I understand what people are going through, every time somebody, they're having those bad moments, and I happen to be a night owl, so I'm up late, and so they tweet me, and we talk, and they tell me these really intimate things about themselves, and then they apologize for doing it. And it's like, I'm thinking, and that's where, my faith comes in. And this is why all these people that say religion never did anything good for anybody, I completely disagree with. Because in my faith, in Judaism, we have this thing called a mitzvah. And the idea of a mitzvah, it's translated essentially, there's no real translation for it. Some people call it charity. Some people call it good deeds. I mean, we also have the actual charitable concept of tzedakah. But that is also an obligation. That's a more accurate translation of the word. And what it means from a faith-based perspective, actually it's a religion, it's a rule, it's not a belief. But what it means is, if you can do something good, you are obligated by the faith to do it. Not for the other person, but for yourself. And were it not for my religion, I would never have encountered that idea. And I would be, I think, a less good person. I would certainly be a less happy person. I would be a more conflicted person if I didn't have that concept in my life. Because if somebody comes to me in a moment of crisis, and, they're talking about being suicidal, or they're talking about being in a bad place, or they feel like their life is worthless, I don't feel burdened. I don't feel like, this is bringing me down. No, I am fortunate enough to be in a better place now. There was a time in my life I wasn't, and I remember that acutely. But I'm in a better place now, so I have an obligation to give that person a few minutes of my time. Not give them platitudes, but just say, I am listening. You're not burdening me. Because, the reason you do peer crisis counseling training and all that stuff is to find a way to not let it stick to you. I mean, that's really what all that training is supposed to do. But that's weird. And I know a lot of people are thinking, oh, wow, big waste of time. And I'm not saying I'm, doing this all the time. It happens every so often. But move that into my other exchanges. And then I start realizing that things I say lightly, I say in jest, other people don't see them that way because they're coming from a very different place. And other things that I'll be looking at like, this is thought-provoking. If you see me provoking, what that means is I don't agree with it all. There's some parts of it I actively disagree with, but guess what? It made me think. It provoked thought. And the fact that people just jump all over everything that's wrong with a retweet like that tells me they don't get the concept of thought-provoking. Thought-provoking doesn't mean you agree with everything, because if you agree with everything, that's not provoking you to think. Provocation, the term provoke, is deliberate there. It means I read something hard, but I couldn't disagree with all of it, or I couldn't even disagree with half of it. Okay, there are a few good points in there, and I like reading things that are thought-provoking. Not when I'm super tired, not when I'm sick, because then I can't be in that grounded place. But what I've realized over time is that it's actually a minority of people who actually thrive on thought-provoking material. Most people want their biases confirmed. And where this has left me is the big question of, what do I do as a person who enjoys respectful thought provocation, but who recognizes that we can't have those discussions in an environment full of political operators just trying to tear down the quote-unquote other side? You know what I'm saying? We can't have that. That's it's not possible. That's the exact opposite of what we're trying to do here. But also, in very open environments, we do need to consider a lot of points of view. And a lot of those points of view are going to come from people who are just looking to have their biases confirmed. And this may sound like a very selfish thing, but it's not. It goes back to that, thinking while poor. They just want that brief thing that's not going to make them feel like shit for a little bit of the day. And that's valid. I get that. But I think what it is, and I know this is something that I had to work on a lot, is training myself not to engage when I'm emotionally compromised. And I've been struggling with that a lot lately. You'll notice the videos have been sporadic, and that's partially because, I was sick, having trouble breathing, having trouble with my throat. But Friday, that I'm not going to claim I did that because I was sick. I did it because I've been overwhelmed by a lot of, world events that have nothing to do with gaming. And then the gaming stuff just seems kind of difficult to focus on by comparison. And I don't like coming at things from a place of anger, because you can't be angry and think rationally. You can't, one of the only useful things that therapy ever taught me was that people react first, think secondly. If you want a great description of this, read a book called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. It talks about how there are certain critical things that hit you on a gut level, and everything else is just justification after the fact for why you had that response. And that, I won't say that book changed my life, but it put words to a lot of the stuff I'd already kind of had the tendrils of. Like, it brought it all together, because I knew for me, when I'm dealing with an issue, and it's a charged emotional issue, I have to minimize the emotion first. And that's partially because I'm an introvert, and I kind of need to work it out in my own head before I bring in anybody else, because it just gets too crowded. And so all the stuff, I'm most comfortable with that all happening internally, and I'll work it out, and then I'll talk to people about it. But that means I sometimes can't respond right away, because if I do sort of let that slip, if something comes out, I'm an introvert. I'm not comfortable with certain processes happening externally. I've always been very introverted, and I also have a very internal locus of control, if anybody knows what that means. Which people are like, oh, everybody says that, but no, I've got papers that have tested this. But that's, part of the reason I don't just go wherever the wind blows online. And some people call that integrity. Some people call that, all these political buzzwords that no longer have meaning because people have used them when they're the furthest thing from what they actually are. I mean, politicians talk about integrity all the time. When you are a representative of the people, a declared representative of the people, the most, integral thing, the biggest step of integrity you can do is say, look, it's not about my opinions. It's about the voters' opinions. I represent the voters. It's not about what I think at all. But nobody's going to get elected based on that, right? You want to know who they are. You want to know who they are as people. When the reality is that representation by population, democratic representation is all about proxy will. You want to talk about agency. There's a classic example of how it's critically important. But that's when I come back to class. And this idea that, this culture war is pushing, that individuality should succumb to class. And this isn't just a Marxist thing, although people would say that that's, Marxist language. If you go around to the other side, the extreme right talks about class in a completely different way. If you hear, Donald Trump and Ben Carson touch on it in different ways, but it's all, that's low class. And it's, it's two sides of the same coin. It's that your behaviors should reflect your status in a larger whole, as opposed to an authentic view of who you are as an individual. And people are, no, it's this and that's it. No. When you get right down to it, when you strip away the wrapping and actually look at the guts of what's underneath, that is what it is. Into dialectics and the actual structure of debates, that's what's going on there. It's all about class. And class is designed to strip away your identity as an individual. And that's why poverty has such a profound social effect, right? When you have money, you can express yourself a lot more than when you don't, right? Individualism is much more present when you have a lot of money. That's why Donald Trump can have hair like that and, still be like a famous person and not forced by a team of stylists and what have you to change to be more quote unquote on trend. And this is true even in an industry like gaming where it's supposed to be an equalizer. The rhetoric has so gotten under people's skin, and even if they're using it to mock, they are using the language and they are using, terms like sexism to mock, but they're still using it. They're still thinking in those terms. And they're, using one thing I talked about on Twitter briefly this week was the idea of when you use, a GIF of these giant boobs bouncing to offend people because you feel people are being too serious. I get what you're doing, but it's still making it harder for those of us that actually have to carry those things around. So please think about that. And that, again, is don't think of the boobs, think of the individual. And it is all about individuality. I really believe that. I really think that if we're going to look at class, we have to look at class without forgetting the individual. And this strikes me profoundly, and I may talk about this tomorrow because it's more appropriate for tomorrow, but we've been gripped by this idea in gaming about women as a class and not women as individuals. And that has a profound effect on how games are designed and how characters are created. And I really want to caution people from, and it might be too late. We have to actually unlearn this stuff. But the way I think about myself, there's me as a class, and I see that as my socioeconomic bracket. There's me as a woman and what that means, and, you know, little reminders I have to give myself because that is relevant to a lot of people. And then there's me as an individual, which defies any physical identifier you can put on me. And I deliberately don't talk about certain parts of my past. I deliberately don't talk about certain elements. You don't hear me talking about my personal sexuality very much, for instance, and I'd rather let people just think what they want than really get into that, because I feel it cheapens the individuals that shared that with me. And again, it's about individuals. And the individual is that part of you, if you want to call it a soul, but I don't want to do that because of you know, the agnostics. You know, you guys have your reasons, and there's a perfect example of I can respect someone even though I obviously don't see the world the same way. I just talked about that 15 minutes ago. But you know, your individuality is precious, and the reason it's precious is because we're all gonna have points in time where we are alone. You know, you're by yourself, there's no other people around you, it's just you and your thoughts. So there's no class, there's no gender, because there's only one of you, so you can't have a binary. It's just you in your own head. And how comfortable you are in those moments says a lot about you as a person. So exactly what I didn't want to have happen happened. The screensaver went off, and so there's going to be a bit of a blip there, but that's my cue to wrap. So it is Mountain Monday, so I have to close. I can't just end it. So we're going to breathe in. And out. And in. And out. So please, guys, see the world as individuals. Treat each other like individuals. Okay?